have a national policy of issuing winding up orders when the tax bill is overdue, and when it comes to a CVA, they will not vote in favour of a CVA. That is their national policy. So we were offering, in the end, 6p in the pound, and you can understand people voting against 6p in the pound. But if you offered them 90p in the pound, they still would have voted no, because that is their policy. So the situation with where your debts lie is going to be something you really have to figure out. What's the percentage that's owed to HMRC, what's owed to others, because you will get absolutely no help from them. Our fundraising, again, the second time, like the first, very innovative. We had giant flag organised by the Dundee Mad website that raised about £30,000. We had a WAGS calendar raising £10,000. We had a scarf, same sort of figure there. We had an auction, all these kind of things, but we also went for regular membership schemes this time because of that sort of watchword of sustainability. And in terms of our trust, we've got about 4,500 members, but of those, there's 500 plus who are paying between £10 and £100 a month to the trust, so that we have a regular cash flow, so that there is income to sustain the business, not only the club but the supporter society itself, and I think that's pretty crucial to have ongoing, because there's only so much you can do with car washes and raffles and so on. Obviously Rangers fan base, the figures that I'm talking about, I think you can multiply quite a few times, but the more sustainable it is, the better, rather than constantly going to the same well and having these having to come up with fresh ideas all the time. The second, or effectively it was the third time that we had to campaign, because we had the 5% and then we had a campaign to get to our 26% shareholding. Each time we raised about £250,000 in the space of a few months. So you can multiply that 10 times, 20 times, whatever you think you're going to be able to do. But I would say, look at fundraising, start planning, start doing that. And if you don't go into administration, then that's great. But you've got funds and you're able to go along to the club and invest in the same way that any other investor would. We were in a situation this time where we didn't really have an owner as such. Bob Brannan had the majority of the shares because he had them as security against loans that he'd put in. But he'd actually indicated to us that his preferred option was community ownership. And so we were probably about 15, 16 months ago thinking, he's going to want away sooner rather than later. Cal Mill's not going to be there forever. We're probably going to be left holding the baby if nobody else comes along. And do we really want anybody else to come along? And then all of a sudden, the rug was pulled from under us, and we had to step up and effectively take over, because nobody else was willing to do that. It wasn't a straightforward process. We had very good relationships with the club, obviously at that stage, being 26% owner already, and we knew that Bob wanted things to go towards the community route, but we had a landlord with an option over the shares. There were all sorts of things that we need to look at. And then we got hit with a 25-point penalty, which meant that any chance of another owner come along disappeared immediately. We had the new business trust formed that came up with 50 grand, and we had the good fortune of a family down south who had a significant sum of money they wanted to put in memory of their late father, which helped us, but that was all post-CVA. And we actually ended up that the fans, the supporter society, had to fund the CVA in its entirety. We brought together the Supporters Association, the umbrella group for our supporters clubs, and the previous business club, all under our umbrella just a few months before, because we knew that if we were going to be in a position where the club was in fan ownership, that we couldn't have all these disparate groups and infighting, and we dropped the D for Life name as part of that, as a concession to say, you know, that's in the past, we're a new group going forward. I know that you've got different groups as well and different opinions, and I would say, you know, the closer that you can work together, the stronger you'll be and the better chance that you have. And we ended up, as I say, with over 50% of the shares because we funded the CVA, and so Dundee is now the biggest, the highest placed supporter-owned club in the UK. So that's scary in a way, because we don't have anybody else to look at and say, you know, how do you do it? People are looking to us now, and we're sort of starting with a blank canvas. But I think there's an awful lot that you can do as a community-owned club, and it all comes back to the fact that, you know, the players on the park change, the owners change, the directors change, even the stadium can change, and the one constant is the fans. So, you know, when you're talking about who the owner of the club is, it's very much a case that the moral owner of the club is you. If the worst happens and you do end up in administration, it's sleepless nights, it's endless meetings and fundraising and contracts and taking up every spare minute that you've got. You know, it's your club. You can't let it die. The owners can. The owners can walk away. But time and again, up and down the country, it's the fans that are left to pick up the pieces. And the stuff that we had, you know, we had pensioners putting in their savings into buckets, we had toddlers putting in their pocket money. It's really kind of heartbreaking stuff. And I think, you know, you see there where the fans pull together, and that galvanises you as a support, as a club, and it does give you an opportunity to be stronger moving forward. But up until the last minute, you know, all that we did that second time, when it came to the CVA vote last year, the afternoon of the vote, we still didn't know how the vote would go, because we didn't know, you know, how some people were going to cast their votes, whether some creditors were going to turn up and vote at all, and it still could have gone the way that HMRC had the majority of the votes and liquidated the club. So it's really, you know, a worrying time. And let's just step back a little bit, because, you know, we all think about Dundee and administration and all the stuff that's been happening, you know, with likes of Leeds and Portsmouth and so on. But if you go back to the 80s and you see Charlton and Middlesbrough, you know, let's not forget they were both liquidated, and the two clubs that are playing under those names now, they're the same club effectively, but they're not the same company. So that's another option that can happen, where, you know, the club effectively, the company gets liquidated and you start again. And we've seen that here. You know, we've seen it with Airdrie United. So that's another option, and it's really not one that you want to contemplate if at all possible. But who knows, that might even be the plan. I don't know. I think you need to figure out what the situation is that you're in, and what the objectives are, if there's anything in the background there. I mean, what do you know about your club's finances? Not just, you know, the shareholding and the profit and loss, but, you know, what about the cash flow? What about the soft loans? What about the tax situation? What's all the background there? That's stuff that you're going to have to figure out. You know, getting organised in terms of that, the legal side, as well as the fundraising, memberships, ideas. But the people and resources is pretty critical, because you're not going to get any help. You need a good financial understanding, you need the good legal understanding as well. You'll need to deal with the administrator, because he runs everything apart from picking the team. But you also need to deal with the owner. The owner's still the owner, even if he doesn't have any say in running the club at the time. And there may be other investors that want to come in. So you're looking at things like heads of terms agreements and offer contracts and due diligence, and you won't get help from the club with that, and you won't get help from the administrator with that. The administrator wants your money, but you need to do all that other stuff yourself. And the first time we went in admin and turned up at Dens, we were represented by one of the top insolvency practitioners in terms of legal firms in Scotland, and I think that took them aback a bit. They didn't expect us to be organised. You know, they think, well, that's a fans group, what do they know? But just because you're fans doesn't mean that you've not got, you know, business heads on you, you've not got people who have the expertise to be able to help out, and that you don't go and seek professional help and put funds towards that if necessary, and it usually is necessary to do that. And we've been doing things like, you know, putting things in contracts and offers. A lot of, you know, kind of people say, it's confidential, you know, why don't you tell us everything? But when things are going in the background, you can't do that. And when you're trying to put together a contract or an offer letter and so on, and effectively administrators or owners are like, no, just give us the money, you know, we'll give you a verbal say-so, or, you know, drop stuff down on the back of a fag packet. That doesn't work. You know, you need to do things professionally, and I think supporters' trusts in general is a movement where we can show we can actually run things better and run things more professionally and more by the book than the majority of clubs are run. And you've got to protect yourselves, because ultimately that is how you protect the club. As I say, the administrator runs a club, but the owner still owns it. So, you know, you can help the administrator out of the hole, but ultimately you've got to have a look at what the end game is, and, you know, what do you get? Do you get shares? Do you get representation? And he can negotiate this, but you're going to have to deal with the owner. You're going to have to deal with other investors. So you need to keep the lines of communication open and be constructive all the time. It took us a long time, actually, the first time, to get everybody around the table just to talk. So that's something that I would say is critical. And then if you do get to the stage of, you know, how does a club exit administration? There's three ways. One is a CVA, which is a company voluntary arrangement, which requires that the creditors holding 75% of the debt agree to what is proposed. Now that proposal, I think typically you see something like 20 pence in the pound. We had 6 pence in the pound. You know, whatever is offered, you're going to have a lot of creditors, directors, etc., who are favourable to that, because, you know, they're going to lose money. They'd rather get something back than nothing. They'd rather see their club survive. But the taxman, on the other hand, will vote against that. So you need to understand what the structure of the debt is, and if there are soft loans and so on. The second way out is obviously liquidation, and the third way out is also liquidation, but having another company take over in the way that we saw with the likes of Middlesbrough or Airdrie United and so on. And if that happens, you know, you might have to start in the lower division. You're definitely going to get hit with the points deduction, but at least with the SPL, you know what the points deduction is. With the SFL, I don't know how they came up with 25 points, pulled it out of a hat. The only logical explanation really is that they thought, because we're midway through the season, that's enough to relegate you. They've never explained how they came up with that, but they did talk about clubs using HMRC as a credit card. And we've seen Hearts, and we've seen Rangers, and we've seen Falkirk, and we've seen other clubs after Dundee using HMRC as a credit card without being punished. So there's a lack of consistency there, and I think you're actually quite lucky in that sense that there's not been any punishment already. There's also the European aspect, of course, where to play in Europe there are now requirements in terms of I think it's being break-even or better on average of 3 years' accounts. So if 1 year's account shows a write-off of £45 million, you could end up in a situation where you win the league and you're not able to play in Europe because of the financial situation.